Sounds never truly die. They just fade, becoming ghosts on the airwaves, waiting for a patient ear to tune them in. My name is Thomas, and as an audio archivist, my job is to listen to the ghosts of sound, the forgotten voices on old tapes. I work in the university's media archive, a quiet, climate-controlled crypt filled with the technology of yesterday. My nights are usually peaceful, spent in the company of crackling vinyl and the low hum of reel-to-reel machines. My current project was cataloging old equipment for disposal. Most of it was junk, outdated and broken. That's how I found it, tucked away on a dusty shelf in the back, not listed on any inventory sheet. It was a radio from the 1940s, a beautiful cathedral-style console made of dark, polished mahogany. It looked pristine. Its large, circular dial was marked with the names of forgotten cities and long-dead stations. It felt wrong to throw it away without seeing if it still worked. It was a piece of history, after all. I brought it to my main desk, the warm wood a stark contrast to my cold, metal equipment. I plugged it in. The large dial lit up with a soft, warm, amber glow, and a low hum emanated from the speaker. The old ghost was awake. I turned the heavy Bakelite knob, the dial gliding smoothly across the frequency band, mostly static. Shh. The familiar, comforting sound of chaos. But then, between two dead frequencies, I found a signal. It wasn't music. It wasn't news. It was a strange mix of what sounded like numbers stations and faint, fragmented classical music. And underneath it all, there were whispers, dozens of them overlapping, rising and falling like a tide. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It was unsettling, but I was mesmerized. I leaned closer to the speaker, trying to decipher them. Suddenly, the whispers and the music stopped. The static vanished. There was a moment of perfect, clean silence. And then, a voice cut through. It was a classic announcer's voice, calm and clear, like from an old wartime broadcast. "We interrupt this broadcast for a special bulletin," the voice said, warm and friendly. "A warning for Mr. Thomas in the archive." My heart stopped. It said my name. I looked around the empty, silent archive, my skin erupting in goosebumps. "The water has a bad memory tonight," the voice continued calmly. "Don't trust the pipes in the rooms below." Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the voice was gone, replaced by the soft hiss of static. I sat there frozen, my mind racing. It had to be a prank, a student broadcast, a pirate radio signal. It had to be. There was no other logical explanation. I tried to laugh it off, my hands shaking slightly. I packed my bag, deciding to call it a night. The archive suddenly felt less peaceful. I switched off the lights and locked my office. The only way out was through the library's basement level. The basement was a maze of old bookshelves and storage rooms, always colder than the rest of the building. I stopped at the restroom before leaving. The pipes in the old building always groaned and creaked, but tonight it seemed louder. I was washing my hands, the cold water a welcome shock to my frayed nerves. I was thinking about the radio's absurd warning. That's when I heard it, a loud groan from the ceiling above me, followed by a sharp crack, like a bone snapping. I looked up just as a massive, rust-eaten pipe burst open, sending a torrent of scalding, rusty water cascading down. It crashed onto the exact spot where I had been standing just a second before I stepped back. The floor flooded instantly. I stood there, soaked from the spray, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the broken pipe, steam hissing into the cold air. The radio's voice echoed in my head. "Don't trust the pipes in the rooms below." It wasn't a prank. It knew. I stumbled back from the hissing steam, my mind a blank slate of shock. The warning hadn't been a coincidence. It was a fact. In that cold, flooded basement, my world fractured. The line between rational explanation and impossible reality had been washed away. I didn't report the radio. How could I? I did the only thing that made sense. I smuggled it out of the archive and took it home. My small, quiet apartment became its new sanctuary. The radio sat on my coffee table, its polished mahogany dark and silent. It looked like a beautiful antique, but I knew what it was. A listening post on the shore of an ocean of ghosts. That night, I waited. The hours ticked by. I turned the dial, but there was nothing but the empty hiss of the modern world. The signal only came after 2 a.m., when the city's own voice grew tired. It was as if the radio needed the silence to hear its own whispers. I started keeping a journal, logging every broadcast. The fragmented music, the strange number sequences, the overlapping whispers. The whispers were the strangest part. They were snatches of conversation from different times, all layered on top of each other. A young woman in the 1950s worrying about a soldier overseas. A man in the 70s arguing about the price of gas. A child in the 30s describing a new toy. They were echoes of ordinary lives, all trapped together in the static. I became obsessed, spending my nights listening, my days researching. I was no longer an archivist. I was a student of the impossible. For 2 weeks, the calm, clear voice of the announcer did not return. I started to wonder if I had imagined him. Maybe the pipe was just a coincidence after all. Maybe I was just a lonely man losing his mind in a quiet room. And then one night, the whispers faded, the static cleared, and his warm, confident voice filled my apartment once more. "Good evening, listeners," he began, his tone friendly as always. "We interrupt this broadcast for a public service announcement." I grabbed my notebook, my heart pounding. This time, the message wasn't for me. It was for everyone. "A warning concerning the old iron bridge on Elm Street," the announcer said. "A support sings a tired song." My blood ran cold. The Elm Street Bridge was over 100 years old, a rusted landmark on the edge of town. "The final note will be heard this Sunday at high noon," the voice concluded. "We now return you to our scheduled broadcast." The whispers and the faint music faded back in, but I wasn't listening anymore. I stared at the radio in horror. This wasn't about a leaky pipe anymore. This was a prophecy of a public disaster, a bridge collapse. People could die. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? "Hello, officer? The ghost in my 1940s radio told me a bridge is going to collapse." They would have me committed. But doing nothing felt like being an accomplice to a tragedy I could prevent. The next day, Saturday, I drove out to the Elm Street Bridge. It was an old, beautiful structure, a lattice of rusted iron. To my eyes, it looked solid. But as I stood beneath it, I felt it again. The same deep, unnatural cold from the archive basement. The wind whistling through the iron supports sounded like a low, mournful groan. A tired song, just as the voice had said. I had to do something. I couldn't let people be on that bridge at noon tomorrow. But I couldn't tell them the truth. The truth was impossible. So I had to use a lie to save lives. My mind raced, searching for a solution. A solution that would get the bridge cleared, no questions asked. A solution that would also make me a criminal. That night, I sat in my car in a dark alley, a cheap burner phone in my shaking hand. My heart was a frantic drum. I took a deep breath, dialed the emergency number, and disguised my voice, making it low and raspy. "There is a bomb on the Elm Street Bridge," I said, the words feeling like poison on my tongue. "It will go off tomorrow, at noon." I hung up before they could trace the call, tossing the phone into a dumpster. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. Sunday morning was the longest of my life. I sat in my darkened apartment, the local news channel flickering on the television. My heart was a frantic, caged bird. The news was all about the bomb threat. The Elm Street Bridge was closed. Police helicopters circled overhead. I felt like a fraud and a felon, hiding in plain sight, praying I was right. The clock on the wall ticked towards noon with an agonizing slowness. Each tick was a judgment. What if I was wrong? What if it was all a delusion, and I had just committed a federal crime for no reason? Noon came and went. Nothing happened. The news anchors began reporting it as a hoax. I felt a wave of nausea and failure wash over me. I was wrong. I was insane. And then, at 12:03 p.m., it happened. The live camera feed shook violently. There was a deep, groaning sound of tortured metal. The old iron bridge shuddered, buckled in the middle, and then collapsed into the river below in a slow, graceful cascade of rust and ruin. There was a moment of stunned silence from the news anchors, followed by frantic, disbelieving chatter. My anonymous bomb threat was no longer a crime. It was now being called a miraculous, cryptic warning that had saved dozens of lives. I felt no relief, only a deep, chilling dread. I hadn't just prevented a tragedy. I had proven that my radio was real. I was no longer a passive listener. I was now an active participant in its strange, impossible world. That night I sat before the radio, but not with obsession. I sat with a feeling of reverence and fear, like a man before a dark altar. As expected, after 2 a.m., the whispers faded and the announcer's warm, calm voice filled the room. I expected a thank you, a word of acknowledgement. What I got was something far more terrifying. The broadcast has been preserved, the announcer said, his voice as pleasant as ever. The final song of the Iron Bridge was quite beautiful. My blood ran cold. Preserved? Song? I stared at the radio, a horrifying new understanding dawning in my mind. The fear of the public, the shock of the collapse, the memory of the fall. It makes the signal so much stronger. It wasn't just predicting these events. It was collecting them. The radio, this entity, it didn't feed on electricity. It fed on stories. It fed on the emotional residue of tragedy. And by acting on its warning, I hadn't just saved people. I had helped it create a stronger, clearer broadcast. I had fed the ghost in the machine. The whispers that followed that night were different. They were clearer, and among the familiar, faded voices of the past, I could now hear new ones, the sharp groan of twisting metal, the shocked gasps of the news reporters, the splash of the falling bridge. The story of the collapse had been added to its eternal, looping library of sorrow. My library. Now I understand my new role. I am not just an archivist of old sounds. I am the unwilling curator of a museum of echoes. The radio still gives me warnings. A fire in a downtown theater, a fault in a subway line, small tragedies waiting to happen. And I am faced with a terrible choice each time. Do I let people suffer to starve this strange entity? Or do I save them, knowing that I am helping it feast on the story of their averted doom, making its signal ever stronger? I have become the keeper of the whispers. I sit in the quiet, and I listen to the tragedies of tomorrow. It makes you think about the stories that fill our own lives, the tales of joy and the tales of sorrow. Which ones will be remembered? Which ones will simply fade into the static of time? If you believe that even the quietest story deserves a witness, leave a like. It's a signal that proves you are listening against the noise. And subscribe, because there are always more signals in the dark. And I can't be the only one who hears them.